Welcome to All Things Moore County, Moore County's weekly radio show highlighting the many facets of the Sandhills. That includes real estate, lifestyles, community and neighborhoods. And now, from 4 Properties, here's your host, Bill Sahadi.
Good morning and welcome to the talk show, All Things Moore County. And Dorothy, I'd like to welcome you back.
Oh, thank you.
It's been a while since we have had a chance to speak.
Yes, it has.
And so you're joining us. This is actually the 10th year we're doing the show.
I know. Long time, huh?
Well,
it's flown by.
It has flown by. It's kind of scary, actually. I remember the call I got in August of 2009 to come in and do a show on real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked in the phone and I thought Steve was crazy. Why would he want me to do that? What we morphed it into a show called All Things Moore County, which gave us an opportunity to talk about a lot of the different facets of the county.
Yes, you've covered an uncountable amount of topics on your show.
So we've had a couple of underlying themes of the show in the past, and
yep.
How many times have you heard me say that the reason people are drawn to this area is because it reminds them of the neighborhoods and the towns that they grew up in as kids, whether they come from New England, from the Midwest, from the Northeast?
Wow. I say at least. I'm like every third show, at least for the last 10 years.
And then if we switch to real estate, how many times have you heard me say or express concern about the changing landscape of Moore County?
Just about as many times.
Well, we're going to be talking a lot today about the landscape of Moore County.
Okay.
What it was, what it is today.
Oh, I know it's changed a lot in the last 10 years.
Yeah, and where it's going.
Mm-hmm.
There's an event coming up on Saturday, the 13th of April, called Party for the Pine.
Okay.
Not pines, pine.
Okay.
And a lot of people who have just moved here will not understand what that's about. But by the end of today, I think we're going to be able to put some definition to it.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, the event is called Party for the Pine. It's on Saturday, April the 13th. The old tree is turning 471.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Makes you feel young, doesn't it?
Well, we're being joined today by Jesse Wimberly, who is the coordinator for the Sandhills Area Land Trust Company. And we're also being joined by Billy Hartness, who is the park superintendent of Weymouth Woods State Park. These gentlemen are here to talk about the event, but more specifically to talk about some of the things that a lot of people don't know about the area, the history of the area, why the pines are such a big part of Moore County, and kind of what it all means. Jesse, this is not the first time you've been on the radio. You're a public speaker. You've spoken to a lot of groups in Moore County. Tell us a little bit, not just about the event, but about the Sandhills Area Land Trust.
Well, we've been around for 25 years, and what we try to do is get everyone to recognize the unique ecosystem that we live in. The Sandhills is a subset of the larger Longleaf Pine ecosystem. And for your listeners who may not be familiar with it,
right.
This was one of the largest landscapes in the United States. Pre-settlement, before Europeans came to North America, we believe this landscape covered 90 million acres, all the way from Virginia to Florida to Texas. And through a long series of turpentine and timbering, that number got taken down to 3.5 million. So it was one of the largest landscape scale changes in the history of the United States. And so this party and a lot of the efforts of groups here in the Sandhills are trying to restore that landscape and bring back attention to the unique place that we live. And again, it may surprise people, but where we're sitting right now is considered a global hotspot for biodiversity. It's second only to the tropical rainforest in diversity.
What do you say to the new demographic that's moving into Moore County that has been transferred here? They're younger families. They might not understand the history of what you just said. Because when they come here, they're looking for restaurants, they're looking for shopping centers, they're looking for places for their kids to go to play. How does that all play into the message you're trying to give?
The message that we want to convey with this Party for the Pine and all our work is take the time to get outside and explore the woods. And there's a lot of different places that you can go to because it really is worth seeing this natural landscape. And it's a little deceptive because when we say Party for the Pine, we always think everyone thinks we're talking about a particular tree, the Longleaf Pine. And yes, that is what we're talking about for the party. But the real diversity of this ecosystem is on the floor. And that's a fascinating story to talk about. Most people see one tree and they go, wow, there's nothing interesting about this forest. You've only got one species. But we like to say the Sandhills is a savanna with some trees on it. And what I mean by that is the diversity is like you would have on a prairie or a savanna with many plant species that are on the ground, and then the canopy is longleaf pine. But you have to look down to appreciate the longleaf pine forest.
Billy Hartness, good morning.
Good morning, Bill.
You're nodding in agreement with everything he's just saying?
Absolutely. It's an incredibly diverse ecosystem, like you said, second only to the rainforest. The big difference is when people think about rainforest, they think about lush forest and the canopy that the Amazon has. All of the diversity here is within about 4 feet of the ground. So that's a big difference, and it's hard for people to wrap their heads around. And there's a reason that early settlers called this a pine barrens. They saw pine trees and they thought that the landscape was barren of life, and so that's why it was called a pine barrens, because they would travel for days and just see the same thing over and over and over. And you have to look a little bit closer to realize how special it is, but there's a lot here.
Layman's question. I'll just play the layman. What is the advantage of preserving? I mean, what do you tell these people? How do they get a better appreciation of what it is you're trying to preserve?
Well, hopefully that's what places like Weymouth Woods provide, is that education. We do a lot of natural resources work. We are obviously preserving a fairly large chunk of land at Weymouth Woods. It's around 1,000 acres. But one of our main missions as state parks is to educate the public as to what it is we're preserving, why it's important, what they can do to help. Providing that information, that's what we are here for.
And the demographic that you're speaking to today is different than the demographic you spoke to, I guess, on you were here, then you left, and you came back.
Correct. So over 15 years, this is my second 5-year stint here. And
okay.
So the first 5 years of my career with North Carolina State Parks, I was here, and the demographic was mostly adults, older adults for a large part of it. Now that demographic changed a lot in the 5 years I was gone, and since I've been back, we are educating a lot more young families. Probably half of our program now is geared towards children specifically, which is great because we want them to grow up to appreciate the outdoors and appreciate this longleaf wiregrass ecosystem, and have some love and respect for it like we do, hopefully. And then they can take our place, right? And still have that mentality that this is worth saving.
Sort of like paying it forward a little bit and passing it on to the next generation.
Correct.
Yeah. So on the 13th of April, you're going to have a bunch of events planned that day. There are going to be hikes in the park, a turpentining demonstration.
Yes, sir. So it is obviously not to the scale that what it would have been originally. A lot of people don't realize when they think about North Carolina and how industry got it started, everybody thinks of tobacco. But in reality, turpentine is what really put North Carolina on the map. At one point, we were supplying 96% of the world's naval store industry. So tar, pitch, turpentine, things that they used on these big wooden ships that sailed across the world. That's how everything moved back then. So 96% of it. I mean, we basically supplied it all to the whole world. And so we do a little demonstration that set up a little steel that shows how the sap that comes out of the tree is boiled down into tar and pitch, and so that's a pretty cool demonstration to see. Hikes to the old tree. There's a former state champion tree on that land also. I'm a big guy. It takes a couple of me to put their arms around it. So it's neat to see some of that. That is one of the largest contiguous tracts of old growth longleaf left, especially this far north. So it's really neat to think about that because of the Boyd family having the forethought to set some land aside, that the timber didn't get taken from it, and now those trees are the oldest living longleaf left anywhere.
Right. For people who don't know where you're talking about, if you were in Southern Pines, you would drive up east on Connecticut Avenue, past the Weymouth House, and then there is a small portion of Weymouth Woods before you get to the Inchaline, the horse farm. It's very scenic. People drive in from Fayetteville, and they all say the same thing. Coming down Connecticut Avenue, now traveling west into town, once they come around that bend and they see that opening at that curve, it's very peaceful, it's very civilized. People then say, oh, we're home. And it's like a million miles away from where they came from on the other side of base.
Very stark contrast.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but that big opening into the meadow there that you are probably referring to.
Yep.
And that meadow is where Party for the Pine is.
That's right.
So we'll send everybody to park through Weymouth Center there. So that's 555 East Connecticut.
Right.
And then we'll kind of funnel people to where we need them to park.
I was telling Jesse before we came on the show, when I purchased my home in 1999, I didn't know Weymouth from a hole in the wall. And yet there was my house sitting on the corner of Weymouth and Connecticut, facing one of the parks that was part of what the Boyd family had dedicated to the town. And I just thought, it's nice to have no neighbors in my front yard. I didn't know much about the history. And over the years, I've renovated the property and kind of cultivated it. And now I realize I'm living in one of the sweet spots in Moore County, and love being the runt in the neighborhood, by the way. But from a real estate point of view, I've seen a lot of things change since I moved here in 1999. And some of it not for the better. The landscape is definitely changing. It's becoming more urban. It's appealing to a lot of the younger demographics. Driving Morganton Road from Old US 1 now across to 15501. I remember that was all woods. And since 1979 when I first came here, and you, I think, are a native of Moore County, Jesse?
That's correct.
So you see this even more so than I do.
Oh, it is. And I think this is probably a good point to remind the listeners of how our wonderful little community came to be.
Right.
And it really dates back to the 1870s, where the founder of Southern Pines, a man by the name of John Patrick, who was he wasn't a realtor, but he was a promoter. And the story goes like this. The train had just arrived in Manly, which just is north of Southern Pines, and that was the end of the train line. And so Patrick, who was local, saw an elderly gentleman sitting beside the railroad track. Remember, this is right after the Civil War. So he sees the elderly gentleman sitting beside the track and said, "Are you in turpentine or timber?" Because at that time, everyone thinks of our little community as golf and equestrian. That's not the way it started out. As Billy alluded to earlier, turpentining and timbering were the operations that were happening. So he says to the gentleman, "Are you in turpentine or timber?" He says, "Neither one." He said, "Well, why are you down here at the end of the line?" And he pointed up at the Longleaf Pine and he said, "Because these pine trees produce ozone." And old Patrick, being the entrepreneur that he is, put together a bunch of handbills and sent them back up to New York. He bought 600 acres on site from the Shaw family. And anyone who rides around Southern Pines will see that it's laid off in a grid, but all the street names are New England states. So
That's
that
right.
was his audience.
That's right.
So he buys 600 acres, puts a grid, and then makes up these handbills and says, move to southern pines. It will cure respiratory problems. The longleaf pine produce ozone that cures respiratory problems. So this whole enterprise that we love today started out as a TB resort. And then, of course, they said, well, that maybe we shouldn't be selling TB as a reason to come here. But that was the whole concept behind how our community got started, as to be a place to convalescence for people with respiratory problems.
It's a great place for us to stop the first set. We're going to come back in the second set. We're talking about the event called Party for the Pine on Saturday, the 13th of April. We're speaking with the Sandhills Area Land Trust, and we're also speaking with the park superintendent from Weymouth Woods about an event that takes us back in history and hopefully gives people a chance to get a better understanding of the area they're living in. This is All Things Moore County. Welcome back to our second set, speaking with Jesse Wimberly from the Sandhills Land Trust and Billy Hartness, the park superintendent of Weymouth Woods State Park. Party for the Pine is going to be on Saturday, the 13th of April. It's at the Meadow at Weymouth Woods, the Boyd Tract, and parking is going to be at the Weymouth Center off Connecticut Avenue. The event runs from 10 to 3. Admission is free. I love your logo, Party for the Pine, with the Soul Pine Tree, but underneath it there's a subtitle, Fire for the Forest. Anyone that's lived here for any amount of time can tell you when there are controlled burns going on, and I don't know that a whole lot of people understand why they're going on. And can we broach that subject a little bit, because it's essential to the longevity?
All right, so the basic reason is that this ecosystem that we have talked a little bit about is considered a fire-maintained ecosystem, which means that all the plants and all the animals that exist here have adapted, and in order to survive and thrive, they need fire on the landscape. So people naturally think of fire as a destructive force,
right,
which it is. So this ecosystem is based on disturbance. So the disturbance of fire, and our other big disturbance that we get here are hurricanes. All right. So longleaf pines are basically your ultimate survivors as far as trees are concerned. They are really well adapted to surviving fire and really well adapted to surviving hurricanes.
Okay.
And so they can outcompete all the other tree species. The natural succession of a forest without any disturbance goes away from a pine into a hardwood forest eventually. So this forest depends on that constant disturbance in order to survive and thrive. So fire is a big part of that. You know, historically, fires would have started through lightning strikes or Native Americans setting fires to clear land or run game or things like that. But there was a huge difference between what happened then and what we do now. You know, if a lightning strike hit outside this building, one of these trees, and caught it on fire, it might go for about 10 minutes before somebody was here to put it out. You know, we are very good at controlling fires for the most part now. Back then, that same lightning strike hit that same tree, it might have burned for 20 or 30,000 acres before something natural put it out. And so our landscape now is so fragmented with buildings and roads and subdivisions and, you know, things like that, that there is no such thing as a natural fire regime anymore. And so it's very dependent on us to produce or try to reproduce that fire regime through controlled burns or prescribed fires. And so that is why you see these natural resources groups out here setting the woods on fire. And it's because it needs it.
So are they trying, is it the survival of the fittest, and the pine tree is the fittest of all, and you're trying to kill everything else around it to preserve the fact that they're just going to be pine trees in the forest?
Kind of. That's a pretty... Oh, that's a little bit oversimplified, but yes.
I've been accused of over.
So that doesn't really, for the most part, it's not killing off everything anyway. It's what we refer to as a top kill. So all of these plants and things that you see out there, what's above the ground dies off.
Right.
But the root systems and everything for those plants are still there.
Right.
And they emerge pretty quickly after a fire. We have one, you heard me refer to earlier, a longleaf wiregrass ecosystem. So that wiregrass is a plant that is directly fire dependent. And if you look out into a well-maintained and burned forest around this area, you'll see this tall, wispy, brown and green grass, and that's wiregrass. And it actually will not produce seeds except for on the years that it gets burned. So it can't reproduce without fire. It is directly fire dependent. And it's one of the major vegetations for this ecosystem, that and the longleaf pine. So there are lots of reasons for us to provide fire for all of these natural cycles that we want to happen. But there's also some benefits to us as humans as well, things like the fuel reduction that it has. So this area was known for having frequent low-intensity fires. So every few years, a fire comes through, burns off all the fuel. There's not a whole lot of fuel, so it's pretty mild as fires go. Some of these things, like we've seen in the mountains a few years ago, or the fires that we've seen out west, part of the problems that they have there are they have decades and decades of fuel that have built up. And so when they do finally catch on fire, it's so intense that it just scorches the earth and it kills everything. It kills all those root systems and things, everything living in the soil, because it's so hot. Here, it burns across the surface of the ground.
It's very quick.
Everything under the ground is fine. Yeah.
So how does a controlled burn impact animal life?
Just what we talked about. Anything that can move away from the fire,
obviously,
they know it's coming. Birds, insects that can fly, things like that fly away.
Yeah.
Mammals you'll see running, or one of my favorite things to see is flying squirrels. They'll come out of the trees and you'll see them glide out away from the fire. We'll see even amphibians and reptiles sometimes moving away from the fire. We have Dr. John Rowe is doing a study on box turtles and the effects of prescribed fire on box turtles in the park. And one of the interesting things is that they know to move, or seems like they know to move to the wet areas in the park whenever a fire's coming. And so they'll move to those spots that don't really burn. And so they're, if they don't get caught, then they're unaffected. And most of the time it seems like they're unaffected.
Mm-hmm. The role of Weymouth Woods State Park. You play a key role in educating the public, do you not?
Yes, sir. That's one of our main goals.
What do you tell people who are moving into town and they just came to Southern Pines for the first time? What do you tell them about Weymouth Woods, Sandhills Nature Preserve?
Lots of things. It depends, if they have a certain interest or whatever. But we give them that overall message that, this is a preserve. This taking care of this longleaf wiregrass forest. We tell them a little bit about the history, the Boyd family donating the original land to the park. We talk about all the neighborhoods around the park, and how much people that live here like us, and of course we enjoy having them all come out.
Right.
And we tell them to, expect to see smoke in there, because if you haven't seen that before and you're not used to it, then that can be a little bit startling. We've gotten phone calls from people that have just moved to the area and
They don't know what's going on, right?
Yeah, the first experience they have with it is seeing a fire in the park, and
They said, we came from New Jersey. What is this?
yeah, it can be a shock to the system if you're not used to it. But it seems like everyone that's here for a little while, they, once they understand why we do it, they get used to seeing it and get a little more comfortable with it, and they're okay.
You have some very nice literature on the Weymouth Woods, the nature preserve. People can pick this up where?
At the visitor center is off of Fort Bragg Road, North Fort Bragg Road. It's 1024 North Fort Bragg Road. We have a pretty nice visitor center. We have an auditorium there that we do lots of the educational programs out of. We have the Sandhills Discovery Room, which is a pretty awesome little museum type room that's geared towards children. It has lots of interactive things for them to play. There's games in there. There's a microscope, so if they find things in the park that they want to come back and look at close up, they can. There's feeders there that all the bird watchers love to come out and check out. A Squirrel Maze, that's, if you've never seen one of those, it's kind of cool to see the squirrels come in and run through. So that room has been something that we've done here in the past couple of years. We renovated the old museum there, and it has been overwhelmingly popular because of that new demographic that you were talking about, and because it's a free place to come and hang out and have fun and learn a little bit, and people with young children, these young families are looking for things to do. So
Do you yourself, are you one of the point people that people will meet and talk to? Will you do the educating? Will you be the tour guide?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I do a lot of the programming there. There are 2 other rangers that work there as well. And then we've got a couple of seasonal employees that also do some of the educating as well.
Right.
Yeah, I did a hike this past weekend, just a spring hike, not anything too glorious, but we had 79 people show up for a spring hike, which was awesome. And to have that many people interested in learning about all these things that we're talking about, because that's the point. We have to make people appreciate it.
As you speak, what comes out in between the lines is that you consider it a real privilege to be here.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is my second stint here.
Right.
And there was a reason, for that. When I left, I had every intention of returning if the opportunity became available, and so when it did, I did.
Jesse, you didn't return. You've always been here, right? I mean, you born and raised.
That's right.
How did you get to a point where you evolved, where you're in the position that you're in today?
Well, that's my background. Environmental education is also my background, and I hate to say how long ago it was, but back in the 80s, I was a seasonal naturalist out at Weymouth Woods as well. So it's a huge part of my life as well. And my family were turpentiners. That's how we got started here.
Okay, I didn't know that.
When we first arrived here right after the Civil War in Moore County, that's what we did, is turpentine. So that's kind of what we're trying to accomplish with this Party for the Pine, is because there are a lot of people involved with trying to restore this landscape, and it is one of the greatest landscapes that anybody can be involved with for restoration in natural history. But we think it's very important to educate the larger public who may or may not have an interest in it, but they're going to see this smoke on a regular basis. We can't hide the smoke. When we're doing controlled burns,
right,
everyone knows about it. So that's one of the things that we're really trying to accomplish with Party for the Pine, is help people understand the role of fire in our community. And you're talking to somebody who's a 4th generation burner. My family has used fire, and all the families in the Sandhills used fire as part of their farm maintenance until Smokey the Bear came along and did an education campaign of saying that fire was not a good thing. But pre-Smokey the Bear, and that wasn't until the 30s. So I'm talking about right after the Civil War, all the 1800s, early 1900s, all families use prescribed fire as part of their regular farm maintenance, especially in the turpentine industry.
Fascinating.
So we're trying to educate people back about if a wildfire is in fact bad. So Smokey the Bear is right. You don't want a wildfire coming through, but in fact, we need fire, and fire can be the antidote to catastrophic fires.
Right. Let's come back in the third set. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the challenges that you face against the changing demographics and what's happening in Moore County as one generation is passing it on to the next. Some challenges. The event we're talking about today is Party for the Pine. It's going to be on Saturday, the 13th of April. It's going to be at the Meadow of Weymouth Woods, the Boyd Track, right off Connecticut Avenue, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our final set. We're speaking about the event on Saturday, the 13th of April, Party for the Pine. But we're also speaking about a lot of the changes in the area to the landscape. Jesse, I remember when I first came here in 1979, I drove out Indiana Avenue, and I drove out to what today is known as Sandhills South. Literally, there were no streetlights. Just woods. I thought I was in the Twilight Zone, and I would see a few homes with lights on. And the first time I came here in July of '79, I actually stayed with a friend who lived on Hedgelawn, but there were only 4 homes on Hedgelawn. So help me. And I thought I was just in the woods somewhere. Today, if you're in Sandhurst, you're in town. Everything is growing and it's spreading. The circle is getting wider and wider and wider. In some ways, you're going against the grain, aren't you? A little bit with all the changes in demographics. But I've always said to people that with all the changes that we've seen, the pockets of this area that have all the character and the ambiance and the woods have actually grown in value, where some of the tangential areas where there's like this Americanization of you don't know what town you're in anymore. You go down 15501, you could be in Bentonville, Arkansas. That's what I think. So I look at those Currier and Ives neighborhoods that still, to me, hold near and dear and reminds me of why I first moved here. But they're getting fewer and fewer.
It really is, and that kind of brings up where the Sandhills Area Land Trust kind of came out of that thinking that you're talking about, Bill.
Yeah.
25 years ago, a group of local citizens got together with concerns about the rapid growth in the area and said,
right,
well, why don't we do something? Why don't we provide an organization that helps people understand that natural history and that connection?
Right.
Like today, if you turn on the faucet here in the studio, that water originated on my farm in West End, and I have a conservation easement to protect those wetlands. And you might ask, well, what's the connection there? And what we have realized is if we work with landowners like my family who want to see that heritage that we have protected, by providing tools like conservation easements, that's a great way for families to protect that history that they have. But more importantly, it's a great resource for the citizens of Southern Pines to have good quality water, which is coming out of Drowning Creek. I don't know if most people in Southern Pines know that, but our dominant water source in southern Moore County is one creek called Drowning Creek, and it heads up on my family farm. So we work with landowners along that Drowning Creek to protect and not develop that land, but we have to provide tools that help them with that economics of making that happen. So that's what the Land Trust is about, is working with families, local families, to protect that resource, which then actually helps the families here in Southern Pines as well.
Yeah, it's a nonprofit organization.
That's right.
It's a 501. Are you reaching out through? You have newsletters that you do send out, Any other way that you get the message out? You have a website that
We do, Sandhills Area Land Trust.org, and
Okay.
we are a nonprofit. We depend on membership donations, so we welcome anyone. We try to have programs like Weymouth Woods where we take people out and see the resources that we have, and education is a big part of what we do as well.
right? And then the Friends of Weymouth Woods, a completely different organization.
Yes, sir. That group is basically a support group for the park itself. They help organize fundraising and volunteer projects of things that take place in the park. We are operated by the state park system, but as everyone knows, the state doesn't always have all the funding that we need for everything that we need to do. So it's good to have groups like that that are passionate about helping the park and help us make the park be the very best it can be for the community. They're doing all kinds of great things and helping out with things like Party for the Pine. We're working on a memorial wildlife garden for the outside of the visitor center right now, and they're helping with that as well.
Mm-hmm. You've got a Facebook page, Instagram page.
Yes, it's if you follow Friends of Weymouth Woods on either one of those, especially the Facebook page, they post all of our educational programs, any events, anything that we have going on. Mm-hmm. They keep up really well on social media. Mm-hmm. And then Party for the Pine has its own website, partyforthepine.org. And so we keep updates for what's going on with that on that website. We'll post photos from the event, let everybody see. There's always a big interest for what food trucks are going to be there, so people can follow and check out what's going on and what's going to be there each year.
Mm-hmm. Do both groups reach out? Do you reach out to for new volunteers all the time? People who are necessary to
Absolutely. Volunteers run both our organizations. It's so important, and it's great to get involved with the community and meet other people who have like interest.
right.
And a lot of people don't even realize they have a passion for it until they learn about it. You know, all these new people that we're talking about coming into the area, they really are a clean slate as far as their knowledge of the area goes, and so they come in and go to this program or go to this meeting or whatever and learn what makes this place special and unique, and they get a little bit of that fire, no pun intended, themselves, and want to help out in whatever way they can, and we're always glad to have them, and of course we can put them all to work.
And Bill, I think this would be a great opportunity to mention one of the highlights of Party for the Pine, Fire for the Forest.
Right.
Weather permitting, the state parks will actually be conducting a live controlled fire demonstration, weather permitting. So this is a rare opportunity for citizens to get to come out and actually see a fire being carried out on a tract of land, and we'll be interpreting that fire for the audience to understand why and what is happening, and that's a rare treat.
Yeah.
Jesse does a great job. Our fire crew will be out there and performing the fire, and Jesse does a great job of explaining what they're doing, why they're doing it, you know, and it's a lot easier for people to understand the concept when they can see it as it's being explained. Because we always get a lot of questions about how and why, and they don't really understand the ins and outs of actually performing a prescribed fire. But with somebody like Jesse standing there, being able to answer all the questions and tell you exactly why that person is doing what they're doing on the fire helps a whole lot.
Right. I assume when you say weather permitting and it's April the 13th, you're not speaking about pollen, you're speaking about wind.
Well, that's part of it. Anytime we are doing a prescribed fire, any of us, the major factor that goes into deciding that is the weather. And so we have a lot of people that ask us about the date. When can I come? What day can I come?
Who knows?
Yeah, we never decide that until the day that we're burning. We're actually, my park is doing a burn today. we were pulling forecasts this morning and making that decision this morning. So, yeah, it has to do with the moisture, the humidity,
Right.
winds, all those factor into whether or not we actually decide to burn or not.
Many times I've seen at Weymouth House, you've done some burns right there on the corner just east of Ridge.
That's correct.
It's a very small area,
is.
but and you're doing it for this very same reason.
Same
It's
thing.
literally
Yes.
right there at the Weymouth House.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Jesse doesn't hold it against me because I'm from Brooklyn and I've been here 20 years now, and I appreciate that. But I will tell you, listening to you guys, I remember in 1979, I was 4 years out of college, and I was here for the first time. And I remember the magic that I felt being here. I thought I had died and went to heaven. I said, this place is so beautiful. I was born in Brooklyn. I could still see. And that's the magic of this area that I still love, and I look for it. I seek it out. There aren't as many places, but they're still there. They're places that I remember. And so, yeah, you know, we can be in a business of development, but we also want to be in a business of preservation at the same time, because this area is worth it.
Planning is huge and so it's very important for our community to keep that in mind as we go forward. Yes, we need all those services that we are accustomed to having, but we also want to make sure that we are not taking away all our green spaces, because a lot of other communities have gotten themselves into some trouble by basically developing everything, and then they discover that their community is not happy because they don't have a place to go.
Scourge of the earth.
And our early founders, the Tufts and the Boyds, they knew this when they created this resort community that we all have come to love. And it didn't matter whether it was golf or equestrian. All these different activities that make our community great are all based on the natural history of our area, the Sandhills. So it is a wonderful place, and Billy's not bragging on it, but the Boyd Tract, where that burn will happen and where this festival is happening, is one of the most important tracts of land in the United States. A lot of the trees in there are 300 and 400 years old, and it is one of the rare places left in this country where you can actually go and see the forest as it appeared 10,000 years ago.
Which is why we are throwing a birthday party for an individual tree. Yeah, that's the whole premise of this whole thing is we are throwing a birthday party for a tree, and we will sing happy birthday, and we will cut a cake, and the whole deal. It's
something to celebrate.
Absolutely.
Billy Hartness, thank you for joining us. You're the park superintendent of Weymouth Woods State Park. We're glad to have you back on your second stint.
Thank you for having me.
We hope you stay. And Jesse Wimberly, thank you for your dedication and your passion. It comes right through in everything you say. And you guys made a great case today. And why this area is so worth loving and keeping the way it is. Party for the Pines, Saturday, April the 13th from 10 to 3 at the Meadow at Weymouth Woods at the Boyd Tract. The parking is at the Weymouth Center, free admission. Hopefully there'll be a controlled burn. There'll be a turpentining demonstration. Be a great opportunity to come out with the kids and the family.
Yeah, lots of games, fun stuff to do for kids, lots of learning opportunities.
Thank you guys for coming in.
Thank you, sir.
Dorothy, thank you. Everybody have a great week.